East. Well, hello, and welcome to another Retropower Uncut. We thought we'd perhaps do a little change today. Because of the Easter holiday, we're filming this a little bit earlier than we would normally. So there's not as much progress since last week to show, although there has been quite a lot going on. One of the things that happened towards the end of last week was we had a huge tidy up in the workshop. Because we've just had 2 cars leave, 2 of the older projects that have been on hold for ages have come out of storage up on our mezzanine in here. So that was a Manta, basically a 400 lookalike cosmetically, Opel Manta B, which is now through in the assembly shop. And also lurking under the mezzanine, there's been a Mark 1 Golf with a VR6 that we started some time ago, and that also has been on hold for a while. So that was moved through into the assembly shop as well. That then coincided with us making some racking to take some of the body panels when we're doing body work on the cars. The panels all need storing. We've had storage up on the mezzanine for a while, but we've outgrown that, so we've been building some panel racks to put those panels on, which are now under the mezzanine there. And then we've kind of coincided all of that move around with tidying up in the body shop. So we've got the cars a bit more neatly organised in here. So that's been one sort of good thing that seems to have been on the cards for a while, because it's just been havoc in here with panels everywhere. We've had 3 blasting jobs in a row last week, I think it was. So everything's out of the blasting room for that, and it just seems to have been havoc for like 2-3 weeks. So it's nice for everything to be in its place, organised, and everything seems to have calmed down a little bit. Gaz has been cracking on with the Mustang. He's polishing the paint. I think you just saw it painted last week. So he's doing the wet sanding and polishing of the paint right now. I can hear that going away in the booth at the minute. So that's looking really stunning. James has been working on some parts for the Chevette that we were designing. So we're doing a Hella Xenon headlamp conversion on it. And we've been drawing up and then 3D printing a bezel design that we've got planned for that, which will eventually be machined in aluminium and will sit around those Hella headlamp units. And he's also been working on the design of a component for the centre console. So on where the gear shift comes through, I probably talked previously about the fact that we did a sheet metal plate that creates a flat plinth where that shifter is, with threaded bosses welded on it. And the plan was to then make a machined aluminium piece that went over that not only incorporated a way of holding the gear gaiter, but also integrated a brake and clutch fluid reservoir, so that we've got then really neat plumbing. We'll have 3 kind of stainless hard lines that come out of that straight down the side of the tunnel, and it's just a straight shot into the where the master cylinders sit, because it's got a tilt and pedal box in it. With the cylinders under your heels and like a cover plate that covers them. So the lines will literally come straight out the side of that cover plate and up into the side of that reservoir unit. So it's kind of a complete billet piece that we've just finished drawing. We'll probably do a 3D print of that just to trial it in the car before we get that machined. But James has been working away on that. Trev's been working on Utah, carrying on with the sort of push forward on door assemblies on that. And then we've been working towards getting that ready to go off to Simpson, which is going to be tomorrow, who's going to be doing the exhaust manifold on it. So we'll probably get a shot of that loading up tomorrow. That'll be at Simpson's for a week, maybe a little bit longer, while he does the exhaust manifold. Then it'll be coming back here and we'll do the rest of the exhaust system. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that on it. Tom's been on with the CV8. So once he'd finished the door frame repairs, or got them to the stage he was happy to park them at for the moment, he's been working on the front chassis structure. There's extensions off the front of the chassis that have the steering rack mounts on, and also extend forward to mount the hinges for the front bodywork. I say hinges, it's not hinges actually. I had in my head that it was a flip front then, which it isn't, so it's just the mounts for the front bodywork. So he's been working on that, and then he's just in the process right now of unpeeling the bulkhead cross member, with a view to then installing all of the revised metalwork that Nat's been on with CAD designing, which will allow clearance for our vintage air heater unit that's going to go in there, heat and AC unit, because that's one of the challenges, surprisingly big challenge. When you think of kind of the major engineering challenges on a car like that, you think, yeah, getting the engine and box in there, getting the independent rear suspension in there, and actually probably the third biggest challenge is getting a decent ventilation, heating and aircon system in there. In terms of sort of chassis structure. So that's what we're on with that. So with that kind of the major progress this week, I thought I'd just take the opportunity to talk through this. We obviously revealed this Land Cruiser project last week. Predictably a mixed response. I mean, we're all incredibly excited about this build. You've probably gathered by now that basically everybody here is completely bonkers about anything that's just cool and old and generally internal combustion powered. And these Land Cruisers, I just think, are an awesome machine. So it seemed to me so much cooler than a Defender. And as has continued through the years, it's always been the go-to sort of bulletproof workhorse that just never seems to let you down. And it's carried on with the 80 series Land Cruisers and the 100 series Land Cruisers of the sort of 80s and 90s. Continued that theme of just being far superior to most of the equivalent vehicles from other manufacturers, you know, such that they still hold an incredible value. You get yourself a late 90s Land Cruiser that's in good condition with low mileage on now, you're paying 20, 25, 30,000 pounds sterling in the UK, where the comparable vehicles from other manufacturers are probably like a quarter of that, and it's a good reflection of how good a car they are. And it goes right back to this. And the thing we love about it is just the simplicity of design that went into making the whole thing just functional and reliable, and with the things that matter when with a vehicle of this type. But there's nothing on it that you don't need. There's nothing that's just going to go wrong and cause issues that was just an unnecessary item on it. And I love that about it. And that's one of the things that we're really going to try and keep fairly sort of key to our changes that we're going to do to this, is not putting unnecessary things on it. We're trying to stick reasonably true to that original design ethos of just simplicity and functionality. And some of the key things that we're going to do perhaps differently to some of the other guys out there doing Land Cruisers. There are a couple of notable companies in the States. Obviously, there's a big scene for these in the States. You know, you've got Jonathan Ward, Icon 4x4. He's a guy that we've followed for a long while because his other hot rod builds, if you like, away from the models that he offers as a sort of off-the-peg build. He does a lot of bespoke hot rod builds, and we followed him for a while on that, but he's quite well known for doing an updated version of these. There's also the FJ company who will build you one of these as a kind of modernised interpretation. Both, you know, a good standard of build, but the one thing that we're strictly not doing on this, which seems to be the general theme with those, is they're always lifted and kind of given this sort of muscular raised up stance, which we're not mad keen on. It seems more suited to a Bronco where the vehicle's a lot wider, so when you raise it, it still looks in proportion. But our opinion is when you raise these, because they're quite narrow, they tend to start looking a bit teetery, as my brother would say. So we're keeping the ride height basically standard, keeping the wheel and tyre choice probably as it is. I mean, we'll refinish the wheels, but we're quite happy with the look of it in terms of how it sits. We'll obviously go through all the suspension and upgrade it in terms of how it functions. So we'll no doubt put, you know, different springs on it. The dampers will be probably in the physical envelope of how the originals are, but they'll be built by another company who can build us a real good performing damper in terms of controlling the body movement and the axles. Engine choice is then the big subject that we've been going back and forth over. A lot of people have pointed out, actually quite rightly, that we've talked about this being an FJ. It's actually a BJ40 because it's the diesel, not the petrol. But it's so ingrained in my head that this shaped Land Cruiser is an FJ Land Cruiser that we just find ourselves calling them FJs all the time. Now, so yeah, this is a 4-cylinder diesel as it stands now. And when we were discussing engine choice with the owner, it was a completely open subject of conversation. Petrol, diesel, how many cylinders? We just started with a blank canvas. Now what we know is it's not going to be a performance vehicle. I mean, to be quite honest, the notion that one of these could be made into a performance car is a bit ridiculous anyway. But the idea is it's going to go over to this guy's farm in Ibiza, and it's basically going to spend its time trundling around Ibiza on, you know, some on road, some off road, with reasonably regular use, but no reason to drive it in a performance fashion. So we want something that's just smooth and reliable, and it'll just start off the button, no messing, no faffing. He was keen on it having a reasonably nice sound to it, and was open to diesel, but was a little off-put by the agricultural sound that tends to go, particularly with a 4-cylinder diesel. So something a bit smoother in that sense. We want an automatic transmission on it, and that also has an influence, because to put the majority of automatic transmissions are considerably, especially when you've got the transfer box on there, are considerably longer than the manual box that's in these as standard. And one thing that's quite notable, even with the relatively small transmission that's on these, the rear prop shaft is extremely short. So one thing that straight away was at the forefront of our mind is it's going to need to be a fairly short engine and transmission combination to mean that we don't end up with a ridiculously small prop shaft at the back. So, you know, so the smaller the prop shaft goes, the more the UJs have to articulate during the suspension travel, and you just get to the point where you're just going outside of their sort of sensible angle during normal use. So that was a consideration. So we were originally thinking possibly a straight 6. Obviously there's the later Land Cruisers had a straight 6. If I can think off the top of my head what that is, I think it's a 1UZ-FE, which we did consider. But the problem we've sort of identified with that is by the time you've got that straight 6 in there, and then got the length of an auto box on there as well, you're just going to end up with either the engine ridiculously far forward or a non-existent rear prop shaft. So that started to rein us back in from the straight 6 idea. We thought about maybe V6s. I know the FJ company used the more modern Toyota V6s, but what we weren't keen on is how modern an engine bay you end up having on using a much more modern engine like that. And then we were at that point where we were juggling, you know, V6, maybe V8. We didn't want to put an LS in it just because it doesn't need that much power. And then we thought, well, what about the Toyota 1UZ? It's an engine we're really familiar with, obviously a very popular engine, the V8 that was, in the UK at least, primarily found in the Lexus LS 400. And we did a bit of measuring up and concluded that certainly because it's only 4 cylinders long, it would be a good candidate. So we got the measurements of the transmission we want to use, which is the old, I think it's an A400. So that's the early Land Cruiser auto box, which is fully mechanical, which we were quite keen. We're kind of keen to keep things simple throughout this. So a fully mechanical transmission made sense, and we measured that up and the 1UZ, and the combined length looked quite promising. We were thinking we're not going to end up with the engine ridiculously far forward, and we can still keep a pretty decent prop length at the back with that. If I just pop this up a sec. So I mean, the existing engine does sit incredibly far back when you consider that the axle line's somewhere up here. The axle line's basically in the centre of this fan shroud here. So the existing engine does sit a long way back. And with shortening the rear prop a small amount, but not to the point where it'd be excessively short, we're figuring we can get the front of the 1UZ somewhere around here. Which isn't a ridiculous position at all, because even though it's only 4 cylinders long, it's still quite a lot longer than the original engine. So the bell housing mating face only ends up probably about 4 inches further forward than where it is now. So that's what we're thinking at the minute. And then what we want to do is extend the sort of simple vintage look to that engine, or introduce it to that engine. So the plans we've been batting back and forth at the minute, although I'm at pains to say at this stage this is subject to entire change, but what we're thinking of doing is designing our own inlet manifolds for that 1UZ that then allow us to put a 4-barrel replacement type throttle body on there. So this would be, obviously a lot of American V8s run a 4-barrel carburettor. There are therefore an off-the-shelf 4-barrel replacement throttle body injection units available. And we were thinking of going down that route, so we can obviously run fuel injection, but we have a compact single throttle body in the V of the engine, and then that would allow us to run a pancake filter housing on the top there, either pressed steel or machined. But what we're thinking is something that's a bit reminiscent of this typical pressed steel black painted airbox that you tend to get on a lot of cars, Japanese cars of this era, with a wing nut on the top of it. So we're thinking something like that to really make the engine look more classic, and then we'll probably do our own design rocker covers on it as well, which would have coil-on plug units incorporated into the design but hidden away. So again, they just look like relatively simple, almost like pressed tin cam covers, but they've got the coil-on plug units incorporated into them. And I think at that point we'd be able to do a really neat job of plumbing and wiring that 1UZ V8 and create an engine bay that looks really in keeping with this era of car. And then moving on to the other things in here, we're just going to keep it simple. We'll probably do our own design radiator, but maybe incorporate this kind of rib design you get on these brass radiators of the era. We'll probably hide the batteries away. There'll no doubt be upgrades to the braking system, but again, we'll probably have a visible servo master cylinder in the engine bay, just keep it really clean, and then we'll try and delete as much of the untidy looking plumbing and wiring as we can, and obviously we'll propose new routing for all of that. We'll wire the whole car in a modern spec wiring, which is what we tend to do on all of our projects. But yeah, that's the direction we're thinking. Keep it simple. On the exterior, we'll probably do a few little changes here and there. It's really just working on the details that are there. So the grille, we'll probably do maybe a machined aluminium grille for it. Upgrade the headlights, but keep the actual bodywork panels probably completely standard on it. We're obviously going to repaint the whole car. That'll be in a different colour. We might come up with a revised bumper design for it. I imagine the chassis is going to stay completely standard, but again, obviously we'll blast that, powder coat it, replace any wearing parts there. And then the interior will be the other area of focus. And again, it's very simple, so we don't want to lose that simplicity. Even things like this sort of bench seat design, it's non-adjustable, so I can barely drive it because to get my feet on the pedals, my knees are right up, virtually in my chest. So we'll probably introduce a seat design that does move, but we were thinking that could be a continuous bench all the way across, because there's no reason the passenger can't be in the same position as the driver normally. So we'll come up with a seat design that's quite in keeping with the original, but adjustable. The dash, again, it's very simple, but it'll just be a case of adding that extra look of detail and quality to it. So, with the instrument panel, we may use the original instruments or possibly a modern version, but the housing itself, which looks just to be a pressed steel piece, we'll probably do a machine piece to finish that a bit more neatly. Maybe do our own switchgear in there that references the original, but just brings it up to scratch in terms of the quality of operation. The heating system, as I was talking about with the Jensen, heating, ventilation, aircon, that can be one of the biggest challenges when we're modernising older cars, to get a decent system in there. I've seen what they've done on some of these sort of builds in the States. They tend to use a Vintage Air system. I think Vintage Air even do an off-the-shelf system for these. But I'm not very keen on the fact that the vents just hang down under the dash. It looks a bit half-finished. So we're going to introduce something that's a bit more impressive there. To be determined. I haven't been through the plans for that. But definitely a decent aircon system that looks in keeping with the interior, and whether that might involve redesigning part of the dash to give us a slightly deeper section in the middle, perhaps, undecided. And then we might extend some details to things like the door handles, window winders, the door release handles are a little bit cheap and nasty looking on these. So we'll probably use different materials, higher quality materials for those. No doubt there'll be leather on the door cards, but again, it's not a total reinvention. We're not completely changing it. We want to just build on what's there and keep the simplicity there. So this is a video of how many times I can say the word simplicity, probably. but that pretty much sums up the build that we've got in mind for this. So it's not a total radical change. It's just re-envisaging how these were meant to be originally, just without the constraints of, you know, the sorts of budgets that Toyota would be having to work to in order to actually sell these for a reasonable price, and just refine the powertrain. So it's a smooth, not ridiculously powerful, it's got some power there, but it's just a nice smooth thing to use that just feels a little bit more refined than what sounds like a tugboat diesel engine in it at the moment. So that's where we're at. I'll be really excited to see that come to fruition over the coming months. I think next week, I've got a meeting tomorrow with the owner to discuss ideas in person with the car in front of us. And then next week, we'll start pulling this apart and start progressing with it, really. So there's no reason straight away we can't get on with refurbishing the chassis. We'll obviously get the bodywork blasted and see what's revealed. Fingers crossed it's a good one. So we'll see what happens. I'll see you again next week. All the best.